I'm Jeff Livingston, the historian with the Hawaiian Railway Society. I'd like to discuss a little bit about the early OR&L, the Oahu Railway and Land Company, the premier railroad in Hawaii. That's not to take anything away from the rest of them, but the OR&L was not the longest, not the first, or not the longest lasting, and not the first, but it operated continuously and made a profit every single year of its operation. That in itself is noteworthy. In 1888, September of that year, the railway bill was passed, and Dillingham received his franchise to build the Oahu Railway and Land Company. By December, the first 12 miles had been surveyed. Now, this first portion was to run from downtown Honolulu to Pearl Lagoon, which is now Pearl Harbor, little past Pearl Harbor, more toward Pearl City. In 1889, they began grading that portion of the line, and it wasn't until May that equipment was ordered. Now, I've made the statement before that the OR&L started out as a passenger service because there was no freight along the line. The original equipment ordered were 2 Baldwin locomotives, 4 first-class passenger cars, 2 second-class passenger cars, 2 combination passenger baggage cars, and then there was one very special car that was not ordered for the OR&L, but that Dillingham purchased himself for himself, named the Pearl. Now, the Pearl was unique in that it was considered a chair car. It didn't have standard seats. It had very opulent chairs that could be moved about the car at will, tables highly decorated, and it came complete with a set of royal blue curtains embroidered with the royal coat of arms should the king or decide that they wanted to take a trip on the train. There was only 1 boxcar ordered, 8 flat cars, and then interestingly, there were 6 other cars, flat cars, with canopies and platforms. Now, the platforms would allow entry onto these cars from the ground like a passenger car. These 6 particular cars were considered third-class cars and were suitable for hauling freight and or passengers. There were some other smaller things ordered, hand cars and track laying cars and some other small cars. And in August, there were 900 tons of rail finally delivered to Honolulu Harbor on the bark Deutschland, and the rails came from Germany in Bremen. Now, Dillingham had made a boast that 1 year after he started, he would give his friends a ride on his new railroad. Well, that time was very fast approaching. September 5th was his birthday. And as August drew to a close, the locomotives from Baldwin had not arrived. A quantity of the passenger equipment and the freight equipment had arrived, built by Carter Brothers in California, but no locomotives. So Dillingham was kind of over a barrel. Well, the Hawaiian government had ordered a locomotive from Baldwin for use at the quarry. And the quarry is not specified, but we believe it to be the Mo'iliili quarry. And it was found unsuitable for use in the quarry. We believe because the track gauge was different than what was already existing there. It was sitting on the pier in Honolulu in crates, not put together, when Dillingham bought it. He quickly assembled it, cleaned it up, and placed it under steam. And that little Baldwin locomotive, it was a little 040, was the first locomotive to pull and Oahu Railway and Land Company train. It ran for about 1 mile through the rice paddies. Now, the locomotive was named Kauila and was given the number 6 because Dillingham's daughter Marion was 6 years old at the time. Well, given the short time to prepare the train and prepare the locomotive and the somewhat inexperience of the engineer, the boiler tubes were not thoroughly cleaned, and Kauila wound up blowing black sooty water all over the nicely white-dressed passengers, who quickly took the Hawaiian Tramway back down King Street while the locomotive made its way back much later. That was a rather inauspicious beginning, perhaps, but Dillingham met his boast. The train ran on 1 year after he received his charter, and it wasn't long after that that the locomotives did arrive. By 1990, the first Honolulu station had been constructed. This was an all-wood building, and you can see in the background that was the original locomotive shed and shops of the OR&L. This would be considered the front. I believe it actually faced a little more toward King Street, but it was completed well in time. And the backside is where you boarded the train. You can see one of the Baldwin locomotives with 4 passenger cars waiting at the station. Now, if you notice, the 2 passenger cars at the front of the train appear to be a different color than the 2 passenger cars at the rear of the train. Now, the first car is a combination car, baggage and passenger. The second is a straight passenger, as is the third car and the fourth car. There is some potential evidence that second-class cars may have been painted a different color than the first-class cars. Although the original order to the Carter brothers, all the cars were painted Pullman green. This photograph does appear to show what may have been a dark yellow or ochre color on the second-class cars, or it could simply be a reflection of the sun. A little better picture of those first passenger cars. This is one of the first-class cars. It's difficult to see, but you'll note that the letterboard is highly decorated at the ends, as well as carrying the name of the railroad. There is additional decoration below the belt rail, that's right below the windows, and a rather ornate number. Unfortunately, even with close magnification, we cannot be absolutely sure the number of this particular car. There's another detail on these cars that cannot be seen, but at the time, most narrow gauge railroads used Lincoln pin couplers. Now, the plantations used Lincoln pin for years and years and years. However, they were dangerous, and coupling the cars together, the brakeman could easily and did oftentimes lose fingers. Not a very pleasant way to do it, and the cars crashed together. But the OR&L used what was called a Miller hook. This was an early semi-automatic coupler that by pushing the 2 train cars together, they would couple, and then to uncouple, there was a lever that stood up above the platform that could be thrown and disconnect. There's a little better picture later on. Now, the first-class cars were somewhat opulent. This is the interior of a first-class car. The seats were rattan and sprung. All of the fittings on the first class car were nickel, and you can see that the overhead was decorated. That was actually a canvas covering that was painted on the overhead and on the sides. The upper windows were called clear-story windows, and those could be opened to provide ventilation. Lighting was provided by kerosene lamps, and there was a chimney that stuck through the roof, so the heat and the soot and the gas could all be expelled outside the car. Now, the OR&L did not run at night very often, but they were perfectly capable of doing so. Now, I mentioned the Pearl being a very special car. This is the Pearl, and you can see an extensive amount of decoration on the exterior of the car and the name on the side of the car. Here you can get a better look at the Miller hook coupler and the lever right at the edge of the platform, just behind the rail sitting off at an angle. This allowed the cars to be far more quickly and safely to be coupled and uncoupled when they were providing service to and from Honolulu, and initially as far as Pearl Lagoon. I mentioned that the Pearl was a chair car. This is the interior, and you can see one table attached to the side. Those were removable and could be moved around, and then the individual chairs could be moved. As decorative as the interior of the first class car was, it can be easily seen here that it was far eclipsed by the interior of the Pearl. At the other end of the spectrum was the third class car. These were the platform cars, or flat cars with platforms. This particular locomotive is number 8, Samson. Came along a little bit later, but the third class car is directly behind it. It's essentially a flat car with seats and a canopy roof. 6 of these cars were originally purchased, and not too long after they were placed in service, modifications began. And we'll talk about those modifications shortly. That very first locomotive, Kauila, she was still in service, still in use, and she exists today at the Hawaiian Railway Society. Just as you enter, Kauila 6 is proudly standing on her display. She still requires a little more restoration work, but she's received a new cab, a new floor, and gets regular care and maintenance. We need to install windows, replace the stack, and find a headlight for it. Now, in this photograph, there is no headlight, but a headlight was originally installed. We know the type, we know the size. We have the original Baldwin specifications for that locomotive. Now, beginning in Honolulu with the station in 1890, additional stations were constructed at Moanalua, Pu'uloa, Halawa, Aiea, Kalau, Waiau, Manana, and Pearl City. Now, when we think of a railroad station, we think of a building. But in these early days of 1890, a station was not a building. A station was essentially a shed. This is a photograph of a typical OR&L station shed, this one at Moanalua. They were built to a relatively standard design, and some of them lasted until the very end of operations in 1946. Other than the Honolulu station, the main depot, the next station to be constructed was at Pearl City. because at Pearl City is where Dillingham began his development of the Pearl City Peninsula into housing lots and selling those lots and providing transportation to the owners, the residents, and during construction provided transportation of construction materials. So it was a more substantial station. Oh, that's the right one. This particular station, excuse me a second, I got some pictures out of order here, but this is good. This is Pearl City Station. This is shortly after it was constructed. This is a two-story station. The station master lived on top, and it was later added to significantly with a freight shed and some other items. The early freight cars of the OR&L, this would have been a complete freight train consisting of 3 cars, 2 box cars and 1 flat car. This particular locomotive is Kauila, and it is designated a 440. It has 4-wheel lead truck, 4 driving wheels, and no trailing truck. You can see this is an early photograph. It has a kerosene headlamp and no electrical system whatsoever. Later it was backfitted with a dynamo, steam-powered dynamo, and electric headlights, and at this point she was still coal-fired and converted to oil firing around 1904. Now the OR&L did expand their fleet of freight cars. They purchased a number of cars, 5 to be exact, from the Brill Company in Philadelphia. These box cars were built and then knocked down so that one complete car carried all of the other wood parts of the other 4 cars, and another car carried all of the trucks. Also ordered at this time was one 25-ton, what they referred to as a wrecking car. It's essentially an oversized flat car. Now in this photograph, it is easier to see the operating lever for the Miller hook couplers. There's one on each end, and this was really quite an innovation for a narrow gauge railroad. The OR&L exceeded expectations when it came to modern equipment, safety, and operations. Eventually they acquired the nickname the Pensy of the Pacific. But freight was still a problem, and most of the revenue was by passengers. So as Evan Mill was under construction, Dillingham ran excursions on a regular basis to come see this marvelous construction and engineering at Eva. So here is Kauila again, still early. This is probably around 1900, 1902. Kerosene headlamp. But take note of the car directly behind the tender. This is one of the 3rd class passenger cars, which now has an enclosed side. The lower half only is enclosed. But this was an upgrade conducted by the OR&L to make them a little less 3rd class and a little more 2nd class. There was still bench seating, and at least 2 of these cars by this time had been converted to freight cars and were used only as such. These modifications to these 6 cars continued for a number of years, and at one point they even had decorated sides, not just a smooth side. The line continued marching past Eva and reached Waianae in 1895. Unfortunately, we do not have a photograph of the early Waianae station, although this is the same station. It looks the same as it would have then. It was taken in the Second World War era, so therefore it has a much more modern locomotive. But the station itself was built in 1895. The OR&L continued on, pushing toward Kahuku, and the station in Kahuku was constructed in 1898. 1898 was a banner year because Kahuku is considered the end of the line. So this completed the mainline construction of the OR&L. From their beginning in 1889 to completion of the main line in 1898 was a significant achievement. Trains ran on schedule regularly and continually. Now, through all of that, this also included the development of the Haleiwa Hotel, Redmond Grove, which was a pavilion and dance area, recreation area. These were all included in the railroad, and like every other railroad, designed to create additional revenue. Now, a number of people may remember the depot at Waipahu. It survived up until the early 1970s. It was a two-story station building. Now, originally, Waipahu had a very small station. The OR&L had a standard station design besides the station shelters, and this would have been the station at Waipahu around 1893, 1894. You can barely see the station. It's off on the left, single story, and is on the opposite side of the tracks from where the later Waipahu Depot or Waipahu Station was formed. A little better picture can be seen here with this smiling group. The station is single story, did not have any accommodations for a station master. The ticket office at one end and a storage area, and the other end was open. So you bought your ticket, you could wait in the waiting platform and board the train. It wasn't until 1911 that Waipahu received the station that most people remember or think of if they read any of the histories. This is the last Waipahu Depot, built in 1911 and finally destroyed circa 1971-72. Just to the right was the freight shed. The one small water tank was paired with two much larger water tanks on the other side of the track. Evan Mill never got such a station. And the reason Waipahu did and Eva didn't, Waipahu became a junction when the Wahiawa branch was built. So you had passengers and cargo traveling Wahiawa to Waipahu, from Kahuku to Waipahu, and from Waipahu to Honolulu. So they required a little more accommodation, more freight room, and thusly this station was built. Evan Mill never got past the small station, similar to that original that was built at Waipahu. Once the Wahiawa branch was built, there was a station constructed at Wahiawa. This was about 1904, 1905. That building existed for quite a long while after. I believe it finally burned. After it was no longer used as a station, the OR&L ceased passenger operations on the Wahiawa branch in the mid-1930s. And if I recall correctly, this building became in excess and was actually converted to a restaurant. And the current bus depot is now located almost exactly where the Wahiawa station was. The OR&L stations, it never ceases to amaze me. The current Honolulu Rapid Transit System, Skyline, closely follows the right-of-way from Honolulu to Pearl City of the original OR&L. It diverges somewhat from there, being further inland. I'm interested to see what future developments may occur. The OR&L wanted to go further into Honolulu, but because of the franchise of the Honolulu Rapid Transit and Land Company, could not, where the Honolulu Rapid Transit may in the future. Transportation has always been critical to movement of people and goods throughout this island and throughout the world. And we are seeing, no matter how you feel about the Skyline, it is going to be an asset eventually. It may be an expensive one, but I am confident in my own mind that it will pay dividends just like the OR&L did. Called Dillingham's Folly at its inception, it was proven to be anything but.